All right, so this is the last formal presentation for the Intuitive Intelligence Symposium, and then we're going to move into our Global Heart Coherence Meditation. So really, this is the last kind of, I guess, talking before we get into the doing, and we actually get to enact everything we've been talking about, because I pretty much feel like this is now redundant. Having amazing women speak, I'm like, I don't need to say anything more. But you know, I'm always good at finding more things to talk about. But it is absolutely that moment where we will gather together and create that ripple in the field. Remember our true state as vibration. That's most exciting about this. But I do have something I want to say about intuition. And I do have some ideas about the future of intuition. And I do have some hope in my heart that what we are creating here together today and over this coming few days, as you watch all of the incredible speakers, 28 incredible speakers in total, that you will change your mind about yourself, and you will start to see enough evidence to point you in the direction that you are totally now ready, exactly as you are, to put down the doubt and to embody with spiritual fierceness your self-esteem, which is your birthright and which is the precursor to you being able to know yourself as God, which is the end point of intuition. So my emerging idea, my contention is this: there is no such thing as intuition, and that we are simply in a temporary amnesia that we will wake up from collectively. And as we do that, this conversation about what is intuition, what isn't intuition, where does it reside in the body, how do we access it, will become redundant. Because when we have remembered through reclaiming our spiritual self-esteem what we are, why would we need a language to communicate with ourselves? Why would we need a bridge between us and ourself? We simply will no longer require this construct called intuition. The great French astrophysicist Jacques Vallée says that the dimensions of time and space don't truly exist, but their function is to allow us to know ourselves, to let our consciousness traverse time and space, which are imaginary constructs. These constructs exist so that we can learn more about ourselves. And I have this theory, and you were talking about consciousness, this idea that if science was ever to figure out how consciousness truly functioned, it would be like pulling out the plug at the wall and we'd just disappear like that. Because if we solve that mystery, then the need for our existence comes to an end, because the end point of figuring out what our consciousness is to know that we are God. And I'm not going to shy away from that. I'm not going to give you a substitute, because there is no substitute. To even say you are the cosmos, or that you're infinite, or that you're unlimited, it is not enough. It's not big enough. When we use the word God, what we're trying to do so badly, so awkwardly, is to reach to the state that is beyond a state, to access the thing, the feeling, the energy, the vibration that pre-exists consciousness. And I'm not sure that it's possible whilst we're still in human form, but it's my very great intention to give it a good try. And that's why we have this construct of intuition, but please don't get caught up on it, because it is serving a purpose just as time and space are serving a purpose. And that purpose is simply for us to get to know ourselves, know thyself. The central spiritual edict, and you have heard it repeated by every single amazing woman here, and every talk that you'll watch that's pre-recorded will tell you the same thing. I don't care how you do it. I don't care how you go and meet yourself as God, but by golly, make that your life's purpose, because that is the work of this life. And if for one moment we get caught up in the belief that something else is the purpose, then we'll just have to keep coming back again and again and again until we figure it out. know thyself, and you will know the mysteries and the teachings of the gods. That is it. That to know yourself is to know that you are God, and that there is nothing that is outside of your capacity. What happens though when we come to that realization, that recognition, and we sort of alluded to it and brought it up in a number of the different speakers today, is that what you think you want for your life will suddenly have no meaning. And what you desire then is to simply be with that God consciousness as much as possible. And that's why intuition matters, but only as a step on the path. Intuition matters as a way into our infinite nature. So when we get too caught up in the idea of intuition as the end point, or intuition as a special magic tool that we want to get really, really good at, we're simply humanizing what is a spiritual superpower. So really it's about liberating ourselves from the idea that we would pursue intuition in isolation, to pursue the tools of intuition, to try and get really good at being able to work with any of the trinkets and superstitions of intuition, to even think about intuition as something that you can attain different levels of mastery of. Because ultimately what you want with intuition is to no longer need your intuition. And that's such a shift in our consciousness that it may take a little while to make peace with that. But like all things, and as Alicia so beautifully pointed out, please be with the process, be unafraid of the process, because the process is going to show you what the next step towards no longer needing intuition. So the future of intuition is for me, the end of the need of intuition. It's a redundancy. So why do I then have an institute called Intuitive Intelligence? And what's the difference between intuition and intuitive intelligence? And this is something that I want to share, because I think it's it's very important. It's the Intuitive Intelligence Symposium. Why is it not just the Intuition Symposium? For me, intuitive intelligence is that next step on that path of moving to the point where intuition becomes redundant. But whilst we're still in human form, just as we still behave inside of the dimensions of time and space, because we haven't quite yet figured out how to permanently move beyond the need of them, we are able to move the conversation about intuition and our lived experience of intuition on. The primary foundation stone of intuitive intelligence versus intuition, which is innate within each of us and is not difficult to access, and we're working with it all of the time, even when we don't know we are. The difference between that rudimentary gut instinct, that intuition, even when it's slightly more evolved in us, versus intuitive intelligence, is spiritual self-esteem. So to commit first and foremost to see yourself as God or infinite unlimited consciousness is actually the first step of activating your intuition. And Caroline Myss talks about this in different places, but it's about learning how to trust yourself. So if the idea of God is really big and amorphous and too far out there, look today to what could I do to start the process of beginning to trust myself. And what will I do as fearful thoughts rise up that try to tell me that I can't trust myself, or if someone's opinion of me derails me, how can I navigate myself back to a relationship with myself that is not built on doubt? Doubt is the enemy of intuition. And that's why we go and pay money for other people to tell us the answers to our life, as Susan said. It's because we want to abdicate responsibility for the power that we have. But that power is, as we've now heard, God's power, and it's not to be denied, and it actually can't be denied. We can try to give our power away, but it ends up very much that we live a half-life, and that we are having to be in a state of denial. Denial is a very, very difficult state of being for us to maintain. Anyone who's lived in denial will know what I'm talking about. It takes a shit ton of energy to stay in denial when actually everything inside of you is screaming the truth out into, through you into the infinite. And to live in that state where you sit in denial, it requires so much force that we will often make ourselves very unwell, either mentally or physically or spiritually. We will be in disordered relationships. We will be in a state of codependence with the people around us, because we have to make bigger and bigger the illusion of the ego to try and sustain that denial. As Susan said, the perfect antidote to this is to sit with yourself and to be in the stillness and the silence. But if your body's addicted to being busy and addicted to the stress hormones and addicted to fear and addicted to anxiety, the second you sit with yourself, you're going to go into a state of panic, or you're going to start, you know, imagining that your house is burning down, or this is where you'll start thinking there's something wrong. And, you know, Gay Hendricks calls this the upper limit. It's where we are at our body's capacity for good feeling, and we can no longer sustain that state because everything's firing inside of us to try to get us out of that space. So it's a process, and if you spend any time with me, that process of becoming to a spiritually fierce state of self-esteem, of putting down the doubt, requires one thing. And it's boring and you don't want to hear it, but it's the only thing, and that is to practice, to practice, to practice, to practice, to practice. And just like, you know, to use the analogy of the dancer's body doesn't do what the dancer wants it to do without rehearsal, without practice, without going through all of the processes that are required to train the body. So please don't tell me that because the first time you sit down in stillness or meditation, or even the 10th time, you can't find that stillness, that you are not intuitive, or that you are not going to be able to do what I'm asking of you. Please become spiritually fierce on your own behalf, because without this foundation stone of spiritual self-esteem, you will not go to the place that your soul is calling you to go. We get turned on to intuition because our soul is calling us, yes? It's not because, you know, for most of us anyway, for most of the women I've met, it's not because they just want to be able to do this thing as a job. It's not like saying I want to train as a nurse or an architect. It's a soul calling, even when you don't know what your soul is calling you to. And often intuition is the first thing that people grab onto. Lots of people talk about it. Lots of people teach you how to use crystals or tarot cards or pendulums or oracle cards, or, you know, to do psychic medium work or whatever. So it's a gateway drug, really. It's a gateway drug to open into your soul. And this, once again, is where we move from intuition to intuitive intelligence, is when you start seeing it not as the tools that are external to you, but an interior state of self-worth, where you are so wedded to your God nature that you are walking the path moment by moment. Intuitive intelligence, as some of the women have alluded to here, is the state of intuition beyond the question. So there's no need to ask a question. There is not a question to be asked, because it is an embodied state. It's a fully present state. It's a state where you are one with this, which is your temple for this human life. It's not your enemy. And it's showing you, supporting you to awaken to that state of absolute knowing. Now, that knowing may come through your claircognizance, it might come through your clairaudience, your clairvoyance, or your clairsentience, but eventually it will become a flow state where you are simply moving through the world with that absolute sense of spiritual self-esteem, that it's only when that flow state disappears and you feel a little bit uncomfortable or disordered, or it feels like things have just gone a little bit awry, that you recognize that you've stepped out of living in communion with that infinite intelligence that is your partner. So intuitive intelligence is learning how to have that relationship with the one mind, what quantum physics called the quantum field. We can think of this as unity consciousness or the divine matrix. It doesn't really matter what word you give to it. It is fact, scientific fact, that there is an inherent interconnectedness between all of us, all sentient life. And that connection is a vibrational frequency connection that goes beyond what can be seen with the physical eyes, and therefore we forget about it because we're lazy, because we have not wedded ourselves to our spiritual fierceness, and our spiritual self-esteem has not risen up to the point where we default to that. And that's what we're here to do. Intuitive intelligence is making the choice to default to your spiritual side. And it means breaking the habits and addictions to thinking like a human. It means breaking the habits and addictions to the way that the ego wants to keep you in a state of being that is low vibrational, and therefore makes it much harder to access these states that are effortless for receiving the communication of the one mind. So without going too far into the science of intuition, because I know we've had some beautiful information from the women here today about that, and I can share more about that later. What we need to recognize is that we cannot sit in our fear and our low self-esteem and expect it to be effortless to live in that flow state. You have to do the work to show up to the state of being or the vibration that will allow you to most efficaciously connect to that communion. If we start thinking about intuition as a conversation that's going on all of the time, you want to be on the frequency that allows that conversation to most easily reach you. And that requires putting down all of that doubt. And that is a process. It's not a fixed endpoint. It's not, well, it does happen very quickly when we line up with it, but it will come and go. The process is not linear. And I think this is a very important thing for us to recognize about awaken to our intuitive intelligence, is that if we're going to be defeated because we have a good day and then we have a series of bad days before we have the next good day, then we're not going to attain what we're looking for. We've been here every day for a week now, gathering in early morning meditation, and every woman here will tell you some days it's like, I'm owning this meditation game, I'm kicking all the goals, and other days it's like, and that's not a reason to not show up the next day. In fact, that's the reason you should show up the next day, because it simply means that the process of awakening to that part of you is still ongoing. There's another idea that when we get to the point where the effort completely stops, that we probably don't need to be embodied anymore. Where if we're at that state, we can probably do more good, not embodied. We can just enter back into the one mind and do our work there. I want to say about this idea of living in that flow state as intuitive intelligence versus every time you've got a question plaguing your ego mind, you go and run and find your pendulum, is that even though that flow state is one of ease and grace, I do want to affirm, and this has been said by several of the women here as well, that does not mean that it is not difficult. And it does not mean that it is not hard. It simply means that we have changed our perception of our life events. And just as Susan was saying, we see everything in service to our awakening rather than it being a series of things that are happening to us in an attempt to derail us from our spiritual path. You know, very often in our spiritual journey, as we begin, every time life gets busy, we'll put down our practices. Like the first thing we do when things get difficult, we'll just stop meditating, we'll stop doing our devotion, we'll stop doing prayer, we'll stop asking God for help, we'll stop doing our visioning, and we'll go, oh, because life's too big right now. And that's the actual freaking point of our practices, is that those are the things that can navigate us through the difficult times of our life. They are not the things that we show up to try and prevent difficult things from happening to us. And I feel like this is such a misnomer about the idea of spirituality generally, but the role of intuition is not to help you avoid life. It's not to give you the heads up to not go that direction because that person's going to be mean to you and you'll feel bad about yourself for the rest of the day. It's to give you a change of perception. And that's what spiritual self-esteem is. It's changing your mind about yourself so that you are no longer seeing your reality as the enemy. You're no longer participating in the world through your shadow archetypes to see yourself as a victim standing in the ocean with the waves smacking you in the face going, oh God, I wish someone would turn the wave machine off. It's like, no. Change your relationship to your life experience by changing your mind about yourself. And don't be afraid that for a while, as Dr. Joe Dispenza says, you're going to be standing in the river of change, and that's going to be uncomfortable. And very often, this is where we'll say, my intuition was wrong. I got led the wrong way because this is uncomfortable as hell. I didn't sign up for this. My intuition was meant to lead me to the garden path, to the Eden, to the ease and grace and all that shit you're talking about, Ricky. There is always going to be a period of disorientation as we move away from the known into the unknown. And remember, consciousness cannot be explained by man, by science. And that mystery is the power of the mystic. To be comfortable with the mystery is what it is to be the mystic, to be comfortable with the paradox, to sit in that river of change and to be unafraid. You're neither this shore nor that shore, to use Joe's analogy. And so we'll often scramble back to the shore that we've known because at least then we don't feel like we're adrift. But to sit in a disoriented state is to be unafraid to meet yourself as that infinite consciousness. And this is part of that process of becoming intuitively intelligent, is disorientation. We will be able to, however, sit in that flow state, sit in that state of grace whilst being disoriented, if we are able to change our perception of ourselves and no longer feel like victims of our reality. There's a lot in that, and I'm aware that I've gone lots and lots of places, but I want very much for us to move the conversation about intuition on. I don't want it to be a trinket and superstition of the new age. I want us to claim our spiritual superpower, which is intuitive intelligence, which is our primary form of intelligence, which is the precursor to all our other intelligences. Because as a global consciousness, when this happens, we will no longer sit in the dream, the nightmare of separation. And we will no longer perpetuate the acts of violence against one another and against the earth, because we will be absolutely embodying the inherent interconnectedness of all life. And we will acknowledge first and foremost that our life is service. And so what's the difference between intuition and psychic readers and the people who do this for a living? And you know, lots of these people are also what I'm described, so I don't think it's one or the other. The difference between intuition as a trinket and just a thing that you do because you're a bit scared about, you know, making a choice for yourself about your future, versus intuitive intelligence, is that you don't ever turn off your intuitive intelligence. You don't put it down. You don't have to do something to turn it on and turn it off. It is you in partnership with God, and you don't want to turn that off, not ever. You want to be in that relationship all of the time, because it's the better, more magnificent part of you. It is you. When I speak of God, I'm not speaking of something on a throne in the sky, making, you know, scores about whether you've been good or bad. That's not, Father Christmas is not God. It's you recognizing that you are that. As Susan said, I am that I am. And that takes a whole bunch of dismantling your belief about yourself. And intuitive intelligence exists on the other side of belief. And belief is what keeps us in a prison. And every time a belief rises in us, as Alicia so beautifully pointed out, it's our job to make a choice about whether we follow where that belief is trying to take us. And the more you train yourself to stay present, and the more you train yourself to be spiritually fierce, you will not go with every negative self-belief that you have. You will not go with every judgmental thought, and you'll break that addiction to those lower vibrational states. It begins with the choice to follow that higher part of yourself, even though you have no freaking idea where that's going to take you. The future of intuition is that we no longer live as though our own little piece of the world and our own little bit of happiness and just the people we gave birth to are what matters. But it is the recognition that as pure vibration, as pure consciousness, we are here in service to that greater good, because there is only one consciousness. There is only one of us here. And whilst we think that we can attain something or take something without it causing harm or a ripple over here, we are living in the illusion. And the science, the evidence has been shown to us so powerfully today that paradigm must change now. And that intuitive intelligence is, in my experience, the way that we can make that change. So the future of intuition is that we no longer even talk about intuition. And we are simply present to our God consciousness, breath by breath, moment by moment, and that we have no doubt that we are worthy of having that communion.